my nephew stole my inheritance. But what he doesn't realize is that along with it, he also awakened my anger. And at 71, I know exactly what to do with both. We sat in a too-bright conference room the week after my brother's funeral, paper cups of stale coffee sweating on the table. I'm 71, a grandmother twice over, and I've buried enough people to know silence should be respected. Instead, Daniel, my brother's only son, clicked a pen like a metronome and pushed a folder toward the attorney. "Let's keep this efficient," he said. "Dad wanted things simple." "Simple how?" I asked. The attorney cleared his throat. "Under this most recent will, the house goes to Daniel. So do the savings, the lake lot, and the watch collection." My brother's watch, the one that ticked against my palm on his last night alive. I felt the clock in my chest stumble. "That's not what he told me," I said evenly. Daniel didn't look at me. "Aunt Ruth, he changed his mind. I handled everything the last 6 months. Appointments, bills, hospice. He wanted to reward responsibility by naming you executor and beneficiary on the same day." I slid the pages closer. The signature date was 3 weeks before my brother forgot his own birthday. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't make this ugly." "Ugly?" The word tasted like iron. "You drained his accounts for care and opened a joint one in your name. You sold the truck to your friend for cash. You moved the deed to expedite probate. Now you call it simple." The attorney shifted. "Mrs. Tanner, emotions are high." "Emotions are honest," I said, and turned to Daniel. "How could the boy I taught to tie his shoes turn grief into a balance sheet?" For a moment, he met my eyes, and I saw the child who once slept on my couch when his parents fought. Then the mask returned. "It's what Dad wanted," he repeated, as if saying it enough could make it true. I folded my hands. My rings clicked together, my grandmother's gold against my plain band. Here's what Daniel didn't know. I had organized my brother's papers, copied his handwritten list from last winter, found the safe deposit key hidden in a book of fishing maps. I had taken the call from the nurse who noticed an ATM transfer and asked if I had a minute to talk. Daniel thinks he inherited a house. He has no idea what it means to inherit a promise. That too-bright conference room, the attorney droning, Daniel clicking his pen like he could stall time, that wasn't the real beginning. To understand how a signature unraveled a family and how I learned to set it right, we have to go back to where it started. It started the winter before he died, the kind of January that turned the lake brittle as glass and sent smoke plumes from every chimney on our street. My brother Michael had been losing nouns. He said the thing instead of kettle, the square instead of television, the blue pills instead of the name stamped on the bottle. He hated being helped, and he hated being pitied more. We made bargains. He kept his car keys if he promised not to drive after 4. I cooked Tuesday nights if he swore he'd use the microwave and not the stove. Daniel lived 30 minutes away and rarely came except to borrow tools or return them broken. One Tuesday, while I was laundering the flannel sheets, Michael shuffled into the doorway holding an old book of fishing maps to his chest like a child. "I need a witness," he said. "For what?" "For me," he answered. He sat me at the kitchen table, the same one we ate cereal at while our father worked swing shifts and our mother counted tips. He took out a short list he'd written in block letters the way he did when he wanted to be sure he wouldn't miss a line. The house, the lake lot, his watch collection, and the old cedar chest that still smelled of camphor and mothballs. Everything accounted for. The language was simple. If he died before me, the house by right of a transfer on death deed would go to me, the lake lot would be sold, and the proceeds used for a scholarship at the vocational school where he taught welding. The watches would be divided between Daniel and my grandson Eli, because the two of them were the only ones who ever leaned close to watch him clean a movement. "Michael," I said, "are you sure?" "Write it once and write it clear," he said. "You taught me that." He had already spoken to Mr. Klein, the old family attorney with coffee breath and a hawk's gaze who never let a signature pass without 3 questions and a glance at the clock. The deed was recorded, the letter notarized, and attached as a memorandum to the older will, and the list, his list, was copied twice. I slipped one copy into my file cabinet under a fake tax folder, as safe as I could make it in a house that any niece or nephew could enter with a smile and a promise. Michael tucked the original into the fishing maps. "Only you would think to look here," he said, and patted the cover. Then he looked at the window where the lake caught the gray light and said a sentence so soft I almost missed it. "If it gets bad, promise you'll keep me out of the courts." I promised. Spring brought early daffodils and appointments. A neurologist confirmed what we already knew, dressed in Latin, mild cognitive impairment, possibly early Alzheimer's. We adjusted. I labeled drawers. I set a phone reminder that said Tuesday stew. I took away his checkbook after he paid the water bill 3 times in a row and smoothed down the panic that rose when he realized it. Daniel began appearing more often, bringing laughter too loud for the room, and a girlfriend who stood at the sink applying lip gloss while my brother tried to remember her name. "I'll take Dad to the bank," Daniel said one Saturday, jangling pockets full of keys. "Get him out of the house." "Call me when you get there," I said. He didn't. When I arrived later with soup and bread, Michael's eyes were watery and his tongue thick. I checked the pill box. 2 of the blue capsules were missing hours early. Daniel waved me off. "He was anxious," he said. "Doctor said it was fine." "Which doctor?" I asked. He shrugged too carefully. "The one who knows what he's doing." On Monday, a nurse from the clinic called and asked if I had a minute to talk. She had seen a note in Michael's chart about a change in medication timing and wanted to confirm it with the caregiver on file. When I told her I was the caregiver on file, she took a breath. "Then someone else is making calls you didn't authorize," she said. "I'm flagging the account for verification." I drove straight to the bank. Mr. Willis, the manager who had carried me on his shoulders at a July 4th picnic 30 years ago, met me in his office and listened while I explained. He pulled up the recent transactions. 4 ATM withdrawals, maxed out, all made after dark. A cashier's check paid to a private care agency I'd never heard of. He twisted his wedding band and said, "Ruth, he came in with Daniel." He seemed compliant. I asked if he wanted to add someone to the joint account. He said yes. "I should have called you. I'm sorry." The apology didn't patch the harm, but it gave me a timeline. I called Mr. Klein and showed him the list, the deed, and the bank printouts. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a long beat, then opened them sharp. "We'll file a springing power of attorney you and I drafted last year," he said. "We'll get his doctor's letter about decision-making capacity for financial matters. We'll send a stern letter to the bank and a stronger one to Daniel. And," he tapped his pen, "I want Michael to tell me, in his own words, what he wants done if someone pushes him." Michael told him. He said it in the same blocky clarity he'd used on the list. "Don't sell the house. Keep Ruth safe in it. Don't let anyone bully me with paper." Life narrowed to needles and forms and phone calls. Daniel arrived with airs of virtue and asked how he could help, always just when a delivery was due or a doctor's office called. He was there the day the mobile notary arrived with a simplified healthcare directive that would have turned every decision to him. I sent the woman away with a glass of water and a warning to check her client's chart. I changed the lock. Then came May, almost warm enough to believe in rest, when Daniel took his father for a drive and returned 3 hours later with barbecue sauce on his cuff and a sheaf of papers in a manila folder. "We straightened it out," he said. "Dad signed a new will." "Makes more sense this way. I didn't touch the folder." "Where?" "At a lawyer's office." "New guy downtown. Klein's too old school. Old school is another word for honest," I said. Michael, confused and worn, retreated to his recliner. He lifted an arm and let it fall, a gesture of surrender I had never seen in him. I sat beside him and took his hand. "Did you sign papers today?" "Yes," he said, lips dry. "He told me it was for the house." "He who?" "My boy," he said, and smiled sadly. I called Klein. He gave me a list of actions and a number for a colleague who specialized in elder law and filing emergency petitions. "We are going to contest," he said, "and first we are going to freeze what we can." 2 days later, we were in front of a judge in a small courtroom with pale wood and the smell of dust. I presented the transfer on death deed recorded months earlier. I presented a letter from Michael's neurologist stating he lacked capacity on the date of the new will. We asked for an injunction against further transfers and an order preventing any sale of real property until the will's validity could be determined. The judge, a woman with hair pulled tight and eyes like drill bits, granted the injunction and set a hearing date. "It looks, on first pass, like someone tried to sprint past the guardrail," she said. Daniel's attorney, a smooth type with gleaming cufflinks, called it a misunderstanding. "My client has only been trying to honor his father's wishes," he said, and looked briefly at me as if I were the messy part. Honor and wish are easy words to say. The weeks between filing and the hearing were a scavenger hunt and a war. I requested Michael's full medical records and sat at my dining table under a lamp, reading charts so dense they made my eyes ache. The dosage changes, the forgetfulness logged in tidy notes, the sudden onset of agitation the morning of the will signing. I circled names: the mobile notary, the receptionist at the downtown office, the nurse who had called me, whose name was Alma, who agreed to make a statement about medication timing, and my role as the listed caregiver. Mr. Willis at the bank wrote a letter documenting the addition of Daniel to the joint account and his own discomfort with the way Michael deferred. I asked for the ATM camera footage, not because I needed to see, but because paper was never enough for men who believed paper was everything. My grandson Eli came over after school to mow the lawn and stayed for iced tea. He is 17 and earnest, and he looked at the file I had assembled with a seriousness that made his face older. "You're making a case," he said. "I'm making a promise stick," I said. He leaned forward. "Nana, I heard Daniel at the funeral say something to Mom's boyfriend. He said, 'Once the house is in my name, I'm doing a cash-out refi and getting clear.' What does that mean?" "It means he has debts," I said, "and he plans to pay them with walls that held your mother when she was a baby." Eli clenched his jaw. "He's not getting it." He wasn't, if the deed held. Transfer on death meant the house bypassed probate entirely and went to me the moment Michael died. Daniel could jangle papers and recite executor all he wanted. It would never turn into title. But the lake lot and the watches and the savings were still tangled in the will, and I knew the kind of damage a man could do on his way out of a burning building. The night before the hearing, I took out the fishing maps. The safe deposit key, a little bronze thing tied with blue thread, had been tucked there since winter. The bank closed in 10 minutes. I drove anyway. I arrived breathless and explained. The clerk looked at the clock and then at my face and waved me through. The box slid forward with the quiet gravity of importance. Inside lay the original of Michael's list, the old will Mr. Klein had drawn years earlier, a letter addressed to me in Michael's blocky hand, and the watch with the cracked crystal I'd held the week he died. The letter was short. Ruth, if they try to confuse me, remind me. If they try to scare you, don't be. If someone says the lake belongs to money, tell them it belongs to time. Do right by the kids who try. And if Daniel gets lost, don't let him drown you. I put the letter back and closed the box. In the bank parking lot, a car idled too long, lights off, two silhouettes in front. When I pulled out, they followed. I turned right instead of left, and they didn't. Paranoia is a bell you can't unring once it's struck. I slept with the hallway light on. At the hearing, the judge worked with her eyes and hands, each document crossing the bench like a boat over a dock. The neurologist's letter, the bank statement, Alma's affidavit about the medication timing, the mobile notary's admission that she never checked the caregiver of record. Daniel sat across from me in a suit a size too big, or maybe he had lost weight. He stared at the table as if shame lived there. When his lawyer objected to the admissibility of the transfer on death deed because it had been engineered in anticipation of this dispute, the judge raised one eyebrow. It was recorded months earlier, she said. Planning is legal. Ambush is not. We won the injunctions. The will contest was set for trial in 6 weeks. In the hallway afterward, Daniel caught my sleeve. "Aunt Ruth," he said, and his voice cracked around the edges of the boy I used to know. "This is going to ruin me." "You did that," I said. "I'm just turning on the lights." He tightened his grip. "You're not a saint. Grandpa left you this house. You already got yours." "I got a promise," I said, and pulled free. "The next day, mister, Willis called and said someone had tried to access the safe deposit box. They had the number, he said. They didn't have authorization. I told them I would call the police if they pressed it. Did they give names?" "No," he paused, "but I recognized the friend. He's been with Daniel before. Tall, shaved head, tattoo of a compass on his forearm." "Thank you," I said, and called Klein. "They're hunting," he sighed. Then we bait a trap. We arranged a meeting at my house under the guise of family discussion, which is another word for airing drawers. I invited Daniel. I invited his girlfriend. I invited Alma, too, under the pretext of dropping off records. Mr. Klein sat at my table with a recorder in his briefcase because men who respect rules still understand secrets. I made coffee and put out cookies. Daniel arrived with the tall friend from the bank, whom he introduced as Pete. He refused to sit. "I don't know why we need this," he said. "The lawyer will handle everything." "Lawyers handle law," I said. "Families handle truth." Pete glanced at the living room shelf where the fishing maps had sat since the safe deposit run. I had moved them to a less obvious place, but left a different blue-threaded key sitting in a dish by the door. It belonged to my old garden shed. I wanted to see who reached for it. Pete did, as if by habit. His fingers brushed the thread, then pulled away. I smiled into my coffee. We talked. Or rather, I asked questions and Daniel wrote checks with his lies. He said he had paid out of pocket for a private nurse while Alma, sitting quiet with her hands on her knees, looked at the floor. He said Michael had begged him to simplify things. He said he had no choice. When Klein asked if Daniel had ever changed medication timing without a doctor's instruction, Daniel said no, and Pete's head snapped toward him with a flinch so small only a mother or an aunt would see. I stood up, carried the plate to the sink, and turned on the water. The noise gave me cover to slide the recorder from Klein's briefcase and set it on the far counter, closer to them. Daniel followed me with his voice, raised now, accusing me of poisoning against him. "You were never there for him at the end," he said. "You couldn't put your life on hold like I did." I turned off the tap. "Daniel, you showed up with takeout and a handout. You lengthened the leash and called it care." He lunged toward me, then stopped, as if a string pulled him back. Pete put a hand on his arm. Dan, he said, and just the one syllable contained years of influence. Not here. They left with the door rattling in the frame. Alma exhaled. He changed the pill times, she said softly. I wasn't supposed to say. He called pretending to be you. He used a calm voice. You're saying now? I said. She nodded. Because he's not calm anymore. The trial came faster than I expected. Time compresses when you have a list. We deposed the mobile notary, who admitted Daniel had arranged the appointment and kept correcting his father's answers to questions he wasn't asked. We found the downtown lawyer who drafted the new will, an eager man with a clean desk and a dirtier conscience. He claimed not to know about Michael's diagnosis. He claimed he had no idea about the transfer on death deed. I watched him sweat, and I watched the judge watch him sweat. Mr. Willis produced the ATM camera stills. In one, Daniel stood with his father at the machine, shoulder angled just so to block the view. In another, Pete loitered near the door, scanning the lobby. We subpoenaed the care agency. It didn't exist beyond the cashier's check. The money went to an LLC registered to Pete. When Pete heard we had the papers, he called Klein's office and asked for a meeting. He arrived in a suit that didn't fit and hands that couldn't keep still. I'm not going down for this, he said. I'll tell you what we did. What you did? I asked. I had not used that pronoun yet. It felt as heavy as it should. He stared at the table and worked a hangnail with his teeth. Dan had gambling stuff, he said. He owed. He said his dad would make it right, that his aunt would be taken care of somewhere else. He wanted the house because a cash-out refinance would cover everything. He thought he could pay you back from the watches. I set up the LLC thing. I told him not to mess with the meds. He said it was just to keep his dad calm. I didn't know about the will until after Klein paused. We'll need you on the stand. Pete nodded. If I don't, the other guys will find me anyway. What other guys? I asked. People who don't use last names, he said, and shivered. The trial had the shape of a storm. Opening statements, steady rain. Witnesses, wind. Cross-examination, a pressure drop that tightens the air. I sat upright and held my hands folded in my lap, the picture of a woman who will not be moved because her roots are deep and the soil packed hard. We introduced the transfer on death deed and its recording date. We introduced the old will and the handwritten memorandum. We introduced the medical records showing the deterioration of Michael's decision-making around the time of the new will. Alma testified about the calls and the calm fake voice. Mr. Willis spoke about policy and regret. The downtown lawyer tried to square his laziness with ethics and failed. The mobile notary cried. Pete described debt and bad choices, and how a house becomes a lifeboat for a drowning man if he convinces himself the boat was always his. Daniel took the stand and lied. He lied about the pills and the bank and the will, and with each lie he looked smaller. Then Klein asked the question I had wrestled with in my bed, eyes open at 2 a.m. Mr. Harlan, he said, using Daniel's last name, is it true that 4 days before the will signing, you attempted to access a safe deposit box at River Street Bank? Daniel stuttered. No, I don't. We have the bank manager's log and a description of the man who accompanied you, Klein said. A man who today confirmed under oath that he went with you to the bank to attempt to access the box. That box is irrelevant, Daniel snapped, finding his spine when cornered. It was full of junk. Junk like a letter to his sister, his old will, and a list naming beneficiaries? Klein asked. Daniel's face went blotchy. He changed his mind. After a diagnosis, after a medication adjustment that you orchestrated, after you added yourself to his accounts, Klein said. Do you understand why this looks less like honoring wishes and more like using a fog to hide a theft? The judge stopped the back and forth with a raised hand. She wrote for a long minute. Then she looked up and said in a voice you obey, "I am setting aside the purported will of May 14th as the product of undue influence and lack of capacity. The prior will is in effect. The transfer on death deed controls the house. I am removing Mr. Harlan as executor and appointing a neutral fiduciary. I am ordering an accounting and referring the financial evidence to the district attorney's office. There are victories so clean you don't know where to place your relief." I cried, but quietly. Daniel stared at the floor. Pete exhaled like he had been holding his breath since the door first closed. The district attorney moved slower, the way real consequences do. Charges for financial exploitation of the elderly, for forgery in the attempt to alter titles, for theft by conversion. The plea offer required restitution, probation, and community service in a hospice. Klein asked if I wanted to weigh in. I thought of my promise to Michael. Keep me out of the courts. Keep yourself strong. I want him to work where what he took can't be repaid with money, I said. And I want every cent back. Daniel took the deal. Sometimes men who make a mess are too tired for a trial. He called me the night before sentencing. The call came late, back when phones tethered to chargers and our breaths go long. He didn't apologize. He narrated. The debts, the men without last names, the girlfriend who left with Pete's cousin, the empty house he had already filled with plans. "I'm not a monster," he said. "I'm just bad at keeping my head above water." "Then learn," I said, without climbing onto anyone else's shoulders. Silence hummed. "Do you hate me?" he asked. Yes would have been easy. "I hate what you did," I said, "and I won't let it touch me again." He cried then, a shallow, embarrassed sound I recognized from when he was 7, and knocked over a vase and tried to sweep the glass under the couch with his hand. He ended the call without goodbye. Restitution arrived in pieces, like a quilt made by many hands. The watches came home, each in its box, bracelets cold as regret. The truck turned up in a tow yard. We sold it to cover part of the scholarship. The lake lot under the old will was sold properly. The proceeds turned into something that would outlive us both. Tuition for kids who smelled like metal and wore their pride on their hands. At the ceremony, I stood by a banner with my brother's name on it and watched 3 students in starched shirts thank a man they never met. Alma came, hair tucked behind her ears, a lanyard at her throat with a new badge from a hospital across town. She had taken a better job where policies lived on paper and in practice. We hugged. "You did right," she said. "I did what he asked," I said. At home, where quiet finally meant peace and not plotting, I opened Michael's letter again and put it where I should have kept it all along, framed on the mantel between his wedding photo and the picture of Eli in his graduation cap. The house felt like ours again. Not just mine and Michael's, but the house of every promise we kept in it. I repaired the porch swing. I painted the fence. I slept. A year later, Daniel showed up unannounced. He stood on the porch with a haircut that looked like it had been done in a kitchen and a suit that fit him better. He held a paper bag with 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "Aunt Ruth," he said, "I brought lunch." I looked at his hands. They were clean. He kept them visible, as if he had learned something about the comfort of transparency. I stepped aside. He walked like a man in a museum he can't afford and doesn't want to break. We sat at the table. He told me about the hospice, about an old man who wanted to watch baseball, and a woman who wanted her hair braided before she died. "I thought it would crush me," he said. "It's something else. It makes the day. Honest. Good," I said. He pulled something from his pocket and slid it across the table. It was the watch with the cracked crystal, repaired. He must have paid someone good to do it because the glass was spotless and the second hand smooth. "It was always your favorite," he said. "I thought you'd want it fixed." I held it in my palm, felt the familiar tick like a small heart that refused to quit. "Thank you," I said. He cleared his throat. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I don't," I said, because I wouldn't give him lies as comfort. "But I expect you to be better tomorrow than you were today." He nodded. He looked at the walls. He didn't ask about the house. He didn't ask about money. He asked if I was eating enough. Men learn in strange orders. After he left, I wound the watch and set it on the mantel next to the letter. Time moves forward even when things stay still. I poured tea and stood at the window looking at the lake. A girl walked by with a tackle box and her grandfather. He carried the rods. She carried the bait. He showed her how to tie a line, his fingers slow, hers quick. When they reached the bend, she laughed and ran ahead, and he called after her, without raising his voice. "Come back when you're ready," he said, like every good man teaches anyone he loves. "People will tell you that anger eats you from the inside, like rust. They aren't wrong, but they are only telling the half. Anger treated properly can be a tool. I inherited enough of it to do the job that needed doing, and then I put it back on the shelf with the hammers and the sandpaper. I didn't polish it. I didn't admire it. I used it. When the scholarship sent its first student to the welding competition state finals, I sat in the stands with a small paper flag on a stick and clapped until my palms stung. The announcer mispronounced my brother's name. I wrote the correct pronunciation on a folded note and handed it to a volunteer. When he said it right the second time, the boy looked up into the stands like he could feel a change in the air. Eli leaned over and whispered, "You did it, Nana." "We did," I said. I still have the bank key, though the box holds nothing of consequence now. I keep it on the dish by the door, blue thread and all. Visitors pick it up and ask what it opens. I say the past, sometimes, to make them smile. But the truth is, it opens the part of me that refuses to be afraid when paper tries to bully blood. It opens the part of me that learned to read legalese at 70 and to file an injunction on a Tuesday morning. It opens the part that knows it isn't enough to survive a storm. You have to rebuild in the way you wish. Someone had taught your nephew when he was still small and scared and thought a lie could float. Daniel sends a card on holidays now. He writes too carefully, like a child learning cursive, and encloses receipts proving that he sent his restitution on time. He never asks for pictures. He never signs love. He signs with respect, which is not nothing. I open the cards and place them in a drawer. Respect takes time to mean something. I have time. On warm evenings, I sit on the porch swing and let it carry me forward and back. I count the creaks and listen to the neighborhood settle. Across the street, a woman my age brings in her laundry and hums a song my mother used to hum while she pinned sheets to the line. Sometimes I see Pete walking his dog. He salutes from the sidewalk, a small gesture that says we were in a bad story together, and climbed out. He works at the community center now, teaching boys to fix bicycles. He avoids Daniel. Some gaps must remain. When the wind comes off the lake hard enough to rattle the chimes, I hold the letter in my lap and the watch in my hand and close my eyes. I can hear Michael at the table, pencil scratching, the furnace, kicking on, the tick. That wasn't just time, but a metronome for the lives we were building around it. I can feel the anger loosen its hold, not because it has nowhere to go, but because it went where it was needed and did what it had to do. A will can be altered. A deed can be contested. A house can be sold, lost, or burned to the ground. But a promise kept has weight. It is the thing you lift when your arms are shaking. It is the thing you set down carefully when the work is done.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.